All right, I'm Dan, and we're here at the GameSalute.com booth at Gen Con 2010, and we're talking with Mike Mearls, who is you're not the lead designer anymore.
Manager. I'm the group manager for RPG R&D. I have three acronyms. It's the GM for RPG R&D. Three acronyms in my title.
Okay, so if you hadn't listened to our interview last year with Mike, we interviewed him last year's show, and we're happy to talk to him this year because he's got one of the hottest things here at the show, which is Castle Ravenloft, the board game, D&D board game. That came out here at the show. It's a co-op game, 1 to 5 players, plays in about an hour, and there's a whole bunch of scenarios and all sorts of cool stuff. We got a chance to play it last night. Mike was the sole designer on it, right, or lead designer?
Yeah, there's three of us. It was me, Bill Slavacek, and Peter Lee.
Okay, so those are our designers. So Mike's one of our designers for that, and they have another in the series coming out. So we're going to have Mike tell us a little bit about the game and how it plays and how it's been received.
Yeah, so Castle Ravenloft, it's a cooperative dungeon crawler. And the key thing is, the basic idea behind the game was create a simplified D&D dungeon crawl experience that didn't require a DM to play. So the idea can be, well, it's been something that everyone in the department had been thinking of, just for a D&D board game. But the real idea kind of hit me when I was at a barbecue with some friends. We're all game players. We're all D&D fans. We wanted to play a game. But it didn't occur to us, of course, we wouldn't play D&D because we'd have to make up characters, we'd have to pick a DM, we'd have to get adventure ready. The prep time, it's pretty, it's a lot of prep time. Now, part of the D&D's fun is the depth, but it does require a lot of commitment up front. So I was just thinking, wouldn't it be great if there was a game we could play, just a co-op D&D board game, like a dungeon crawl? And really one of the key things was, I know a lot of board games have modular boards or hidden board that's revealed. Once we kind of got, hey, why don't we use that tech in Castle Ravenloft to build the dungeon as you go, to get that sense of exploration, that's really the key that kind of started to tie everything together. And once we had the mechanic in place, then it was really just about creating, there's an event deck that triggers encounters and traps. There's a monster deck. Peter Lee was the one behind the monster deck. So since there's no DM, when a monster shows up in the dungeon, you need a way to run it without forcing the players to make decisions. So they can cheese out. The ghoul decides to run away, back into the corner where the ranger can shoot it, and stuff like that. So it's got a very simple AI system, a very simple if-then statements that guide how the monster acts. And then the final kind of breakthrough was, if you think of a lot of dungeon crawlers, if they're competitive, there's a DM aspect to them, who runs, basically the monsters take a turn, players take a turn, monsters take a turn, players take a turn. We broke that down into when each player takes a turn and then takes a turn on behalf of the game acting as a DM, where each player might have a number of monsters they're controlling or a trap and so on.
So similar, most co-op games have a kind of good stuff happens, you do your thing, and then bad stuff happens. The bad stuff in this is monsters spawn, traps spring, all sorts of stuff, and you do that every turn. So you got your hero phase, you've got your encounter phase, and then you have your exploration phase, or I might have those out of order.
Yeah, no, that's hero phase, exploration phase, villain phase. And essentially, if you've played Pandemic, that was one of the games that kind of I play a lot of Pandemic, and the idea of when you have the infection phase. It's sort of like, okay, you've taken your turns, you've cured some infection, traveled around, and now you see how it spreads. And that kind of came the idea of I really like that give and take of between each turn, the state of the game changes. You can't really just say, okay, the four of us are going to go, this is exactly what we're going to do, because there's this random element inserted between each player's turn that changes the board, changes the condition. And that really maps very well to thinking of a DM-type role, encoded within the game rules and the decks, where, okay, the fighter goes, well, now this skeleton jumps out of the, comes down the corridor and attacks the cleric. Now it's the wizard's turn. Well, okay, now I'll blast the skeleton attacking the cleric, but then a pit trap opens beneath the wizard, and things like that.
Yeah, it gets very interactive, and the tiles have a bunch of squares on them. I don't know how exactly how many, maybe it's 16?
Yeah, the tiles are, 16 squares, 4x4.
And so they interlock like puzzle pieces, but then when something spawns, there'll be a little pile of bones on the ground, and it'll tell you always put monsters on there when they spawn. So you walk into a tile, you'll be like, okay, you're on a tile, draw a monster card, you draw it, oh, it's a skeleton shows up here. On the skeleton card, it says tactics. The skeleton will move on, if within one tile of someone, it'll move to that player and attack them. You move, you roll a d20 just like you do in D&D. You add the attack value on the card. They have a certain amount of damage. The damage is very low values here. It's 1 and 2, and the heroes might have 8 hit points, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we intentionally want to keep the map very simple. Also, most of the monsters, like minions, just have 1 hit point. Some of the tougher ones, like the gargoyle, have 2 hit points.
Or the hag.
The hag, which is actually a convention special with 4 hit points, and also there's a mechanic in the game where each player is tracking a set number of monsters. Like if you draw a monster, you keep it in your hand to track on your villain phase. The hag moves from player to player, so she goes a lot more often than other monsters.
So yeah, it starts out, they'll show you in the little book for each scenario. There's a bunch of scenarios, not just like random stuff. You'll start out basic scenario, and they'll tell you like, okay, you want to get to the chapel. That was the scenario we played. You want to get to the chapel, and you want to find the icon of Ravenloft, and you want to rescue it essentially. And the way that you win, it'll tell you right in the sheet, is you get into this room, you pick up the icon of Ravenloft, just meaning you put your figure on it, and you pick it up, and then you kill all the monsters in that room. And so that's like one simple scenario, and then you've got, I don't know how many scenarios does the game come with.
There are 12 scenarios.
Okay. And obviously further down the line, they could do expansions for that and have more scenarios. But the idea is, we sat down, we had not played the game. Now, we've all played D&D, and we played 4th edition, and there's been a lot of discussion about like, well, it's kind of like, and actually the guy that announced it last night said, if you take 4th edition D&D, and you take like Betrayal at House on the Hill, and you kind of merge those together, that's kind of the feel, because we were learning it as we went. We didn't have DMs there, so we're just like, okay, we're going to read through the rules. We got the whole thing done in under an hour, our first time playing. Now, if you don't know how to play D&D, it might take you a little while longer, but it was very intuitive. As anybody that's played any version of D&D, you just go, oh, I've got my stats here, I roll my D20, I attack, and just every turn just flowed very smoothly.
Yeah, really the key was we wanted a game that played as quickly out of the box as possible. It even extended to like the dungeon where you build the dungeon as you go. I didn't want you to have to set up much of the board. You really just shuffle the decks. Each player plays a different character class. Each one is like a race and class combination. So you're playing a Dragonborn fighter. There's an Eladrin wizard. And you get a number of cards for your powers, your spells, your attacks you can choose. And that kind of gets the character creation thing. But we really want to be like, once you're done, once you picked a couple powers, you're ready to go. You just put down the start tile and start drawing cards and tiles and start playing.
Yeah, and the tiles actually show you like it's 4-sided tiles. So you're like, well, how am I going to put that on there? Well, they have little arrows, and you always say, oh, I'm going across, I'm exploring this edge of the tile. And then you draw the tile, and you point the little arrow towards where you are. So wherever you came from, that's where the arrow points to. And once you've done that, the arrows don't really matter. There are white arrows and black arrows. Black arrows mean that a bad encounter happens in addition to a monster. The white arrows, it's usually just a monster when you reveal. And if you just hang out, you're just like, well, if bad things happen when I encounter new tiles, I just won't go to new tiles. You can do that. You can hang out on your tile. If you don't flip a tile and get a monster, you have to draw an encounter. And those can be bad too.
Yeah, the encounters are designed to be worse than monsters. Because a monster can always miss. You know, it has to move up next to an attack. You can do things like if you're the Eladrin, you can teleport away and maybe escape the monster. The way the monsters move, they move by tile rather than by square. So if you're like 2 or 3 tiles away from a monster, it's going to take a while to catch up to you. The encounter deck, that was nasty, because there are things where it will just say, poison gas floods the dungeon, everyone suffers an attack, take 3 damage on a hit, take 1 damage on a miss.
And there are even further bad effects. I think these are in the encounters where they're continuous effects. So it'll be like a horrible miasma. Everyone gets -1 speed, and this doesn't go away until you get until something happens. Something tells you to get rid of it.
Yeah, we wanted to basically create some variety of the cards to really alter how the game plays, to give it a different flavor. So and actually that's probably the area where we took the most work for the game design, was to just make those cards work in a nice variety. For example, at one point we had cards that would spawn NPCs, where it'd be, okay, you found a villager who's trapped in the dungeon. If you bring them to the exit, you gain a bonus XP or bonus magic items. If they die, you'll take a penalty, or things like that. So, and
the XP ties in that all the monsters have XP values on them. There's different ways you can get XP. I just draw a random card, and it was like horrific experience. You gain an XP, and so you put that in a little pile, and then you can level up. And how does that work with the level up process?
So for leveling up, if you roll a natural 20 on an attack roll, and it has to be a player rolling that, not a monster, you can spend 5 XP and level up. And when you level up, you get extra powers, you have more hit points. So it's a bit of a power boost, sort of at the midway point through the adventure. You can also spend XP whenever you draw an encounter card. You can cancel it by spending experience points.
That's 4 XP, I think?
No, it's 5.
5 to level up. Is it different to cancel a card?
It's 5 for both.
Okay. So 5 for both. So if something's really catastrophic, you could say, hey, let's pull that together. You can pull between players, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Great. And so you can level up. It's just you start at level 1. You can flip your card over to level 2. It's really designed to be just kind of a base level game. Theoretically, you could do higher levels in the future, but I think that keeps it nice and simple because it's only playing an hour. Like I use a daily power. Chances are it's the only time I'm going to use that this game. There are things that can flip them back over, but it just feels like a very short session of D&D.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the flavor we wanted to go for. Like with the different scenarios, they each have a different flavor. They have some unique mechanics tied to them. You're talking about the icon scenario. There's another scenario where you go into the dungeon just during the day and you want to escape before the sun sets. When the sun sets, there's a tracker on that scenario that tells you how to use it. Bad things start to happen. So there's really, the adventures are designed to feel kind of like D&D adventures, where each one's a different story.
So yeah, and there's another version of the game coming out in November, I think, and it's used to be called something crazy like Dungeons & Dragons Fire Mountain in development, but now it's Wrath of a Shardalon, and that's going to be more traditional like fantasy big dragon monster.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be it's a combination of a classic dragon, giant dragon's lair. It also has some aberrants thrown in. I know there's an Odiug miniature in the set, and it's going to follow the same pattern of, but it uses the same core rules as Castle Ravenloft, but has different miniatures, different tiles, and a different encounter deck, different magic items.
Different heroes?
Different heroes, exactly.
Are you going to be able to use them between the games? Can I take my Ranger from Ravenloft and play it in the other?
Yeah, yes, you can. They are completely compatible. And one of the things we've done, too, with the encounter deck and the tiles, they have a lot of them are labeled and named. So, for example, you talk about the scenario you played where you had to get the chapel. The scenario tells you, take the top 8 tiles off the deck, put the chapel in there, then put the 8 back on top. So we can refer in scenarios to specific tiles, specific event cards if we wanted to. So we could create scenarios that combine the two. We could say, hey, take these 30 cards from Castle Ravenloft, take this list of 30 from Wrath of Shardalon, combine them into one deck, and then use this set of tiles to play out an adventure.
It's really excited about these games coming out. And you mentioned the box and the miniatures. I was touching on those 2 points. The box, if you know square boxes, so like let's take a Ticket to Ride size box. So that's what it looks like when you look at it in the front. And then you kind of start getting to 3D, like you start walking around and you're like, is that like 2 boxes? It's really thick. This is like thicker than a Battles of Westeros box. It's like 6 inches thick. It's a meaty box. And people look at it and they're like, wow.
Yeah, we definitely went all out with the components. And our production team, they did a great job making, you think this is something where I don't think of as a designer, even just with the interior tray. I think it's really well designed, so everything stores nice and neat. It's very easy to organize. I think they did a great job putting that package together.
And the minis are just unpainted D&D minis, so you'll recognize, like, you play D&D minis, you'll be like, oh, that's like something skeleton. On the bottom of them, they just say like spider. It doesn't say like jumping spider, but they're those sort of sculpts. And then I think there's a couple new ones, and then they're all just unpainted, but they're kind of like different colors. Some of them have a translucent plastic, the wraiths. So definitely really nice looking pieces, nice looking components. All the characters have their own unique figures, and then you've got I think a single D20 in the game.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so you can use your own fancier D20s, that you buy yourself. Yeah, it sounds like Wizards is really trying to expand D&D the experience. Like they want you to be able to read the novels, they want you to be able to kind of integrate some of that flavor and more flavor, even more than usually in there, into the books. They want all the standard mechanics of regular D&D. Now you've got the board games that make it easier to play there. They've got D&D encounters going on Wednesday nights at stores all over the place. So there's just a lot of different ways to experience D&D, and hopefully that one of those fits into your schedule. I think I'm most excited about the D&D board games because it's just so easy to just be like, hey, pull this out at game night, and I get that D&D experience in a really short amount of time. A lot of the other dungeon crawling games are really long affairs. It's like they simulate D&D, but to the extent that it takes 4 hours to play. And this is like, oh, I just want to play an adventure. And they're like, I want to play through all these 12 adventures, and then I can get the next one. And we had people asking us, like, oh, how much is this after the demo? Because they're like, this is an awesome game. Like, it must be really expensive. It's got awesome pieces and everything. I'm like, oh, it's $65. They're like, $160? And I'm like, no, $65. Like, $85? Like, no, $65. And, that's not super cheap for a game, but it is, you look at it, it's well worth it because you're getting all these scenarios, all these great pieces, and then you can build on them as they go. It's basically the price of like 2 D&D books. So you get all these great components that you can use in your D&D games too. The dungeon tiles are all 1-inch squares, and the minis you can use. So I just feel like that's a really strong direction for that to go. So congrats on all your great work on D&D and overseeing all of that. We'll look forward to more great stuff about to come in the future.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me on the show.
Great. Have a great rest of the show and a great trip.